This entire concept is so crazy to me. Like all the rich people meeting together to pretend they give a shit and genuinely want to change the system that has placed them at the very top of the ladder, and like, oh yes, let us all meet so we can discuss if there is perhaps some way to find a more even distribution of wealth and resources. Hello, Halfpint here, and I just wanted to say real quick, if you've been enjoying my content, please remember to subscribe to the channel here on YouTube and follow me on Twitch so you can always catch us when we're live and see more content. Also, if you are new here, welcome in, and if you're enjoying the video, please remember to like it because it helps me out a lot. I also post funny clips and other things on TikTok. All the links are in the description below, and thanks again. Now let's get into the video.
Are billionaires at Davos farming thousands of lab-grown babies in Matrix-style incubators?
Okay, so is a company making babies in incubators and using them as batteries? Because that was the whole thing in the Matrix, is like the machines had taken over and they were using like the natural electricity from human brains to power themselves and their world. Why would a company do that unless the company was robot based?
Fortunately, no. That's a conspiracy theory that was spread by nutjobs on Twitter who got so much traction, Reuters actually had to do a fact check on it, with the origins of it being this video that turns out just to be a concept idea by a filmmaker. But Davos, on the other hand, is less of a conspiracy theory and more of a conspiracy fact. Right? If you're unaware, it's a yearly conference where a bunch of billionaires, central bankers, heads of state, and Fortune 500 CEOs meet at a luxury ski resort in the Swiss Alps. And there, they discuss how to address all the global economic and political challenges facing our world. But the most recent meeting happening last month, and it went kind of how you'd expect a hotel full of rich people putting their brains together to go. You had a panel that was basically an infomercial for the Saudi crown prince, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema high-fiving over their support for the filibuster, a group of executives proposing better company culture as the solution to worker discontent rather than, I don't know, paying them more. And despite Davos supposedly being committed to the Paris Climate Accords, a recent Greenpeace report exposed its gross hypocrisy, finding that about 500 private jets flew in and out of last year's summit, and half of those were short-haul flights under 750 kilometers that could have easily been done by train instead. And my personal favorite, the single shortest flight being just 13 miles.
Oh my God.
But the organization that got the most attention for skewering Davos was Oxfam, which released a world inequality report titled Survival of the Richest to coincide with the opening day of Davos, a straight shot across the bow. And it's packed full of mind-boggling facts, so to kind of get a sense of where humanity is at in 2023,
we spoke with Nabil Ahmed, Oxfam America's Director of Economic Justice.
And he told us that in the decade before the pandemic, the global 1% soaked up roughly half of all new wealth created. But then COVID arrived, and in the years since then, that number has gotten so much worse.
The world's richest 1% have grabbed 2/3 of all new wealth created in the world. Do you know what that means? That means they've grabbed twice as much money as the rest of humanity, the 99% of us put together. That's truly extraordinary.
Just to put that into perspective, the top 1%.
It's not extraordinary. It's fucking heartbreaking. It's gut-wrenching. It is abysmal, horrific. Did I say disgusting? It's immoral. It is so many other things other than extraordinary, and I guess it is extraordinary only in the way that it is a new level of oppression that is being inflicted upon the rest of us. I can't believe that's the adjective you went with. This entire concept is so crazy to me. Like all the rich people meeting together to pretend they give a shit and genuinely want to change the system that has placed them at the very top of the ladder, and like, oh yes, let us all meet so we can discuss if there is perhaps some way to find a more even distribution of wealth and resources. Despite the fact that we are the ones that have all the wealth and resources and benefit inherently off of this current system. Let us discuss how much of our position we would like to sacrifice for the subhumans. Like, are you fucking, like, oh, the whole thing just seems like posing. Like, just posing to appease the rest of us and make us feel like they actually care. They don't care. They don't care. They don't care. They don't care, and that is why they're in the positions they're in.
$26 trillion and everyone else got 16. Or to put it differently, that's $1.7 million in their pockets for every dollar the bottom 90% earn. Which is why Nabil says this level of inequality hasn't been seen in decades, possibly even surpassing the Roaring 20s. But it's also important to note that inequality comes in many forms. You've got not just class, but race, gender, nationality, and on inequality between nations, or what Nabil calls colonial inequality.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it, colonial inequality. Yeah, absolutely. You start to get like a real picture of why the world is the way it is when you look at the entirety of it under the idea of Eurocentric white supremacy and preservation of capital and capitalist societies. When you look at that as the picture of I guess modern history, as they call it, and I guess even history, the whole thing makes sense. For whatever reason, that's what it became about early on. It has remained about largely. And the effects of that process at points in our past are still within our current societies and even upheld by systematic oppression of, you know, minorities, other genders, other nationalities, other religions. Like it's so deeply ingrained. That's why all the time I just regularly come back to this thought of and think and say, we have to tear it all down and rebuild it from the ground up. Like this so many parts of this machine were constructed to specifically preserve a way of life for a very small group of people. And until the whole system is gutted and rebuilt, it will always come back to that. Like, you can change a couple parts out here and there, but the end result is still more or less going to be preserving that way of life.
He said things are just getting worse there too.
Because, you know, for hundreds of years, we saw the gap between rich and poor nations widen as a result of that horrific era of slavery and colonialism. Then, in the wake of liberation, earlier in the 20th century, we saw that gap begin to start to close. And do you know what's happened now? As a result of the pandemic, we're seeing that gap between rich and poor nations widen again.
Much of that inequality is rooted in the history he just described, which left poor countries dependent on their former colonizers through mechanisms like financial obligations, for example, with absolutely huge chunks of their already meager national budgets used to just pay off the interest on foreign debt rather than go towards healthcare, education, infrastructure, and other public services. Which isn't to say like all these countries don't have their own upper crust as well. They do, and more middle-income ones like India, China, and Brazil have their own billionaires. So inequality is everywhere, and depending on who you ask, some might actually say it's a good thing. Or we've all heard that metaphor that a rising tide lifts all boats, meaning the wealth trickles down to the poor as well, but Nabil says otherwise.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Oh my, I've never heard the rising tide raises all boats. I've never heard that in my life. But I can already, like, that doesn't make any fucking sense because in the metaphor, a rising tide raises all boats. So the billionaire's the ocean and every other person is a boat? I thought we were all boats. Boats don't influence the ocean. So if in this metaphor I am a boat and the billionaire's the ocean, well then I still fundamentally have a problem because my entire existence and safety is tied in with this person alone. You know what I'm saying? Or like a small group of people. That still sucks. We should all be boats on the ocean together. That would be the more ideal picture. But you've created this situation in which, like, normal people are boats on the ocean and a small group of people make up the ocean. That's ridiculous. And that's also how capitalism relies on, you know, making itself so oppressive and a necessity, quote unquote, within the world, is by doing the same thing with other nations, where, you know, the capitalist nation of America becomes the ocean and the boat is the foreign country where our factories are, or where we're importing goods from, you know, that sort of thing. Their boat relies on our ocean and we're the ocean. So like that, okay, well then the ocean's in charge of me, and that's still inherently unequal and not good.
For the first time in 25 years, we've seen extreme wealth and extreme poverty rise simultaneously. Even before the pandemic, we were seeing poverty starting to rise in some places around the world. we were also starting to see the actual rate at which poverty was being reduced. We were seeing that decelerate. We were putting the alarms out. To be honest, too few governments around the world took it seriously. We heard a lot of talk. We got a decade of lip service, and then
then comes a pandemic, which triggers that Eurocentrism again, and immediately gets a lot of countries that, you know, systemically preserve a certain way of life for a certain kind of people. They're obviously going to fight very hard when they're all scared to make sure their people of a certain kind of a certain place are taken care of, which is pulling resources and capital from other places. Those things have to come from other places. And also the acquisition of, you know, their supplies is going to create a what's the word I'm looking for? A scarcity of those supplies, generally speaking, in the globe. So it all comes back to when so many systems around the world are built around Eurocentrism and preserving capital and capitalism, it's always going to come back to this sort of behavior when shit hits the proverbial fan. So until we like rip it all down and stand it all back up, I just don't see a way this doesn't keep happening over and over again.
Comes the pandemic.
Now, according to Oxfam, roughly 820 million people are going hungry, those disproportionately being women and girls. With the cost of living going up, you're seeing that problem get worse and worse, with at least 1.7 billion workers in countries where inflation is outpacing wages, which Oxfam argues is driven by that very inequality.
Right? It estimates that excess corporate profits have produced at least half of inflation in the US, UK, and Australia.
With Nabil adding that inequality is literally killing people.
Inequality is not academic. We've shown through our work as well that yes, inequality leads to less safe, less healthy, less happy societies. But you know what? Inequality also kills. Inequality contributes.
You just said that. Like, you just said that. If inequality leads to less safe, less healthy, less happy environments, then, like, you know, safe literally refers to a person's, more often than not, physical safety, their health, you know. Are they at risk of being injured, if not dead, in their environment? Healthy, you can get sick and die, especially if left untreated because you can't afford it. Inequality of wealth. You know, this is what we talk about when we talk about universal health care.
Inequality leads to less safe, less healthy, less
happy. You know, obviously, happiness is important. Not permanent happiness. There's no such thing. But, like, regular dose of happiness and taking joy out of your own personal existence is essential for you know, having the internal drive to take care of yourself. Anyone who struggled with depression will tell you this. But also just not to just survive your environment, but to actually live in your environment and enjoy your life. Like, that, obviously that's crucial. And obviously, if even one of those categories isn't met, your life is more at risk than it would be otherwise. You are not in a homeostasis state, emotionally, physically, or otherwise. You are in a more negative space. So, like, I find it weird that he's even saying that, like, and, you know, in addition to those things, you can even kill you. Like, yes, everything you just said very much can create a path towards a person not being alive.
Happy societies. But you know what? Inequality also kills.
Especially when you're talking about things like healthcare. You know, if you can't get treated and then you die because you're sick, or if you can't buy freaking food, or food that is nutritious enough to keep you actually nourished. And even that can go on if your gut health gets off, that can affect your mental health, which can affect your ability to take care of yourself. Like, all these things tie in together.
Quality contributes to one death every 4 seconds.
So what exactly are the causes of this huge upsurge of wealth to the very top in the last few years? Well, there, Nabil gave us a few answers, starting with the fiscal and monetary measures taken by governments to revive national economies.
Number one, we saw this injection of trillions of dollars into our economies to keep them afloat. But without the guardrails existing in our economy to share that wealth fairly, so much of those trillions ended up lining the pockets of the very rich through a stock market boom, through an asset boom. That's number one.
Then we saw what Nabil calls a corporate smash and grab for profit. Opportunistic companies exploiting the rise. And
I just realized I never updated my stream title. Oh my God. I'm so off today.
prices.
95 food and energy corporations have actually doubled their profits in 2022. At one point, we saw some of the big pharma companies making $1,000 in profit a second.
And finally, the pandemic accelerated long-term trends like the weakening of labor unions and the strengthening of monopoly capital. So all of this raises the question, well, how do we get the hell out of this mess? Well, if you ask the Oxfam report, the answer is taxes, 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 though not even across the board. Right? Its recommendations are as follows. First, one-off wealth taxes and windfall taxes to end crisis profiteering. 2, permanent taxes on the richest 1%'s income and capital gains. And 3, direct taxes on the wealth of the rich, including on inheritance, property, and land. And we're going to talk about that last one because Oxfam actually worked with 3 other organizations to crunch the numbers, and Nabil told us what they found.
Just to give you one example, wealth tax of up to 5% on the world's multimillionaires and billionaires, that could raise about $1.7 trillion. That's enough, to illustrate, to lift about 2 billion people out of poverty.
Saying this is a problem not just of political will, but also of imagination. But here's the thing, since the
5%. 5% could make that much of a difference. This is why I find it so posing and fake and just bizarre. This concept of all the richest people or all the most influential people meeting together and discussing how they might improve the situation. Just like, what the hell are you guys talking about? You're literally the reason we're all in hell. Like, all of you in this room are the main contributors and wake up every day and choose not to end world hunger, choose not to end the healthcare crisis, choose not to end the worker crisis, you know, like all of that, the real estate issue. You are the people who wake up every day and choose not to actually end those things. And once a year, you get together and pretend like you actually give a shit and are gonna spitball ideas on how to fix it. That's crazy, because all of us down here have been shouting for a long time, taxes, money, this is what we need. And you're basically gonna gather and say, it's like that episode of The Office when the salesmen all get together and they're talking about how they don't want to have to give some of their bonuses to the other members of the office since they got such big bonuses, and they're all mad and they end up like making them cake, and they're like, you know, that was an integrity move, so thank you. And they realize they don't have to give them money, so they don't. It's just like that. They're trying to figure out what is the way we can get peace in the office again without actually giving these people what they deserve or losing any money on our end. What is the way we can do that? What is the way we can solve wealth inequality without losing any of our wealth? Well, gee, probably few.
Pandemic, none of that's happened, and in fact, we've slid backwards.
As well, our research shows that 95% of countries froze or cut tax rates on the very richest and on corporations during the pandemic, at a time when governments needed that money.
Right.
I know in this story,
but they did that because they were worried about inflation during the pandemic from lack of, you know, resources, you know, like supply chains breaking down. And so like corporations, since they have such a stranglehold in capitalism on, you know, legislation and influence of laws passing, especially in emergency situations like that, they can create this narrative of like things will get too expensive, outrageously expensive, if we don't make sure that the corporations take the smallest hit here. And that's not true, because we saw that like overwhelmingly, and they talked about here, industries were seeing record high profits for the first time in 50 years during the pandemic. You know, 2/3 of the wealth, more wealth squeezed out of the 99% aggressively than like historically has happened since possibly the Great Depression. Okay. Because it's fundamentally not true. And the truth is a corporation has every reason to constantly look for any opportunity to squeeze as much money out of whatever situation they can ever. So if a pandemic comes along and they can see it as a financial opportunity to make even more money, they're going to take it every day of the week, even if they don't actually need it, because that's their bottom line anyway. This is what I mean also when I say capitalism fundamentally becomes the problem. Greed inherently will always win, because greed is rewarded in capitalism, and greed does not work well in an altruistic society or an altruistic, you know, social group. They fight against each other. So like, just, I don't know. It's, the whole thing's exhausting.
Throw a lot of numbers at you. And it could be very hard to fathom what $26 trillion really means. Which is why I want to give you the words of one of the world's richest men himself, Warren Buffett, who remarked many years ago, there's class warfare all right, but it's my class, the rich class, that's making war, and we're winning. And on that...
Yeah, 100%. So corporations definitely squeezed money out of everyone during the pandemic, which we're seeing obviously over and over again with various industries reporting record high profits. And I don't know how we should ever expect anything else to happen in the current system. Because like I said, this current system was stood up to preserve basically white men. White men with a lot of money. A lot of the world was set up to protect white men with a lot of money. Or at least a lot of the world that had influence, you know? In the parts that weren't dominated by white men, it was still money. People with a lot of money. It basically always came back to that. And capitalism was supposed to be the answer to serfdom, you know? Capitalism was supposed to take the system in which people were enslaved based on debt and create an equal playing field to where people, you know, are free and can do what they want. And while we got a little more freedom, we still also live enslaved based off debt. The only difference is if you take out a student loan to go to college and, you know, you have, you know, maybe you went to med school or something, you have like $150,000 in debt. You're not doomed to work for that bank or that loaning place that like gave you the money. That's not how it works anymore. You're no longer enslaved to your lender, but you are enslaved to the system because you have this debt. You must work a job. You must work a job that makes you enough money to pay off that money, you know? And I get that, like, nothing is free and no exchanges are free, but all I'm saying is, like, it's not that different. We are still, for the most part, people in debt who are constantly working to pay off this debt. Explain to me how that's different than serfdom, in which people were doomed to always work for higher class people because they were born into debt and born into debt-based lifestyles, and they will always be working to pay off debt. Student loans, house loans, car loans, credit card payments. How are these not the same thing? Just slightly renamed and reworked to where it's a more palatable way to handle it. Like, I have the illusion of choice of where I work, but I must work. And I never had a chance not to work, you know? And I'm not saying that I should. I'm not saying anyone should have the chance not to work, but I'm just saying, like, it's dumb to pretend that we have infinite options compared to then when we just have slightly more. But obviously, you know, if an animal's been in a small cage its entire life and you let it into a small yard, even if the yard is criminally small, and still nowhere close to what the animal needs to thrive and survive and truly be happy, it will be thrilled because it has so much more room to breathe now. And that's what I feel like the 99% is in a lot of ways. We've been tricked into this idea of, like, this is what freedom is. Freedom's been redefined for us. Freedom is just having a couple of choices, but they're essentially all the same choice. Gotta tear it all down, build it back up. Thanks for watching, guys. Follow me on Twitch to join us live, like and subscribe, and I will catch you later.